And so I think the Fed's strategy is to try to inflate the way of the US out of that problem. And that's the inflation that you see, in my opinion, is both deliberate and it's permanent. But the Fed printing the money, that's not we the people at all. Not at all. It's a sham, is what it is. Yeah, but we're here again.
But much worse.
But the stakes are higher.
Yep, yep.
And the consequences are more severe. The Fed is wanting to take over the retail money supply. It is very clear that that is where the Federal Reserve is headed generally.
Welcome to Risk, everyone. I'm Lee, and I have a very special guest with me today, Mr. John Titus. John, how are you this afternoon?
I'm good, Lee. Thanks for having me on your new show.
Oh, it's great to have you here. You have done so much research into the Federal Reserve and the banking system. So I'm excited to have you here. Why don't you sum up what you've learned? Because you have so many great videos on your channel that I highly recommend that anyone who's interested in this subject view some of them. Are there any of those videos that you would recommend right off the bat to start with?
Yeah, I'll kind of walk through them as I walk through this sort of a narrative. I don't make that many videos. I think I've made a total of 25, very casual pace.
So many of them are so good.
Of video production. But when I got into this space, I was really concerned, and I still am, with the rule of law generally, and with the non-prosecution of banks, even when we knew that the banks, they would admit that they perpetrated crimes, for example, UBS, rate rigging, and HSBC, money laundering. And there was never any prosecutions, and nobody would go to jail. And that was sort of the thrust. And if there's one video to watch more than any other on that topic, the rule of law, that would be The Veneer of Justice in the Kingdom of Crime in 2016. But eventually I was really focused on bailouts and how the banks got bailed out and why was there a double standard. And eventually I figured out that the banks had to have some sort of pre-existing power both to get bailouts and to be immunized from prosecution. And so I backed into the space of money creation by commercial banks and money creation by the Federal Reserve. And that's really where I've been since 2018. Probably the one video to watch, a couple. One would be Mommy, Where Does Money Come From? Which walks through, yes, commercial banks do create money out of thin air. They are unlike other lending institutions. They are unlike other businesses and other financial institutions. And then the other video to watch might be A Quantitative Easing is the Greatest Sham Ever, which walks through why when the Fed creates reserves, and while it's true that reserves don't leak out into the regular economy, the way the Fed has been doing quantitative easing since the pandemic has resulted in the mirror image creation of retail money in the regular economy. And that really is what is leading to inflation now.
You show that very clearly on the graph that you present in that video.
Yeah. I walk through it. It's crystal clear.
Yeah.
And I don't see many people talking about it. So I try to make, I don't watch other people's videos, except when I'm thinking about making a video and I go and I'm like, has somebody done this before? Surely somebody has done this before. And then I'll find nobody has done a video, so I'll make a video.
But how did you get into this? I mean, what drew you into it?
Into what? Video making or into
the research that you did? I mean,
well, the bailouts of 2008. I was asleep in front of the television like everybody. Well, I speak for myself. I was asleep in front of the television up until 2007, and then things. I was working. I was making really good money. I was really active in the markets, but then I started to see a lot of things and started noticing things on the ground that were actually flatly contradictory with the story that was being told on CNBC. Everything's fine. Real estate prices always go up. Put your money in the stock market. And I was seeing things in 2007 that were flatly contradicting that narrative. And thus began a long series of rabbit holes for me that have led to where I am right now.
I think quite a number of us have gone down similar rabbit holes, different ways. Yeah. I know I have, and mine actually started back in the tech bubble. And I didn't go nearly as deep into the Fed, but I used to scratch my head back then. I would say to myself, and I still do, if people actually understood our monetary system, they'd be infuriated because these people are creating wealth out of nothing and they're stealing our labor where we're actually creating value in the economy.
Right.
And they're not.
Right. And that's the fundamental problem. And it ties into back to my original thing with my entree into this area was the rule of law and banks not being prosecuted. Well, the whole notion that commercial banks can create money out of thin air and that the Fed can create money out of thin air, and both of those are the creators in both of those spaces are private institutions. That's contradictory to the rule of law, because under the rule of law, everybody's supposed to be a level playing field. I mean, that's not what we have. What we have is a system where a tiny group of the people is allowed to create money out of thin air and lend it to the rest of us at interest. And then there's the rest of us who have to borrow, money that is lent to us by our superiors. And that's really the nut of the problem. That's the root of the problem to my way of thinking. And that's really what I've pursued and a lot in a way on my channel.
And that pretty much has driven the asset bubbles that we've been living under decade after decade, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's driven, but it creates when you have a debt-based monetary system, when people are lending money into existence, it creates a two-edged sword. Yeah, they can gin up bubbles and have done that. That's what the Fed was doing leading up to 1920. That's what the Fed did leading up to 1929 to 2008. Because when you have these crazes where you have these bubbles that are just inflated out of nothing, those bubbles are eventually popped. And it gives the people who can create the money out of thin air enormous control, because they can simply tighten the money supply overnight by canceling loans. If your money is debt based and you cancel a bunch of loans, you restrict the money supply. And that was really the lesson of 1929. The money supply declined by 30% over the course of 4 years. And then you flash forward to 2008, and that's really what gave the banks the leverage to get the bailouts, was they had a gun to Congress's head. By that time, your top four commercial banks controlled something like 40% of the retail money supply, the top four banks being Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America. If one of those banks goes down, realistically, they're going to take the others with it, and your money supply is going to get crushed by 40% overnight. Forget 1929, where it declined by 30% over 4 years. I mean, we've given the banks not only the power to create money, but we've given them, through consolidation over the years, literally a gun to the country's head where they can do whatever they want and they can't be prosecuted. They are above the law now. And there's really we're past the point of no return there.
Well, let's just talk about the economy in general. I mean, back in 1913, I mean, there were literally hundreds of thousands of companies throughout the nation, U.S. And since that time, that number has just steadily declined as merger after merger has come. And from my perspective, that would never have happened if we didn't have the system that we have.
Right. For the reason that you alluded to earlier, which is the people who can create money out of thin air, they can buy a business. You might spend 10 years, building up a business. You can't create money out of thin air. You got to make it the old fashioned way, build it through profits, and your business gets successful. And then along comes somebody who has the right to create money out of thin air. They can buy your business. Certainly, they can either buy your business or buy a competitor and put that competitor in a very favorable position to do damage to your business. It's an enormous advantage that's given to a tiny group of people. And it's really not discussed at all.
No, it's completely left out of the narrative. In fact, thinking back to the Occupy Wall Street movement, that was pretty much anger toward the same kind of issues that you were talking about. But that crowd was blaming capitalism. And to my mind, this is about as far from capitalism as you can get.
Well, there's I just made a movie back then. I had produced a film called Bailout, and it was in post-production. We had just finished it up right as Occupy was started. So I was going around to a lot of different Occupy sites, Boston, New York, San Fran. I was in Louisville, Charlotte. I went to Chicago. I was a lot of times in Chicago, but at a lot of different sites. And what was going on the ground at Occupy Wall Street was much different than the way the media was portraying it. The media was portraying it as like hippies with bongo drums and all lefty and all this stuff. And there was some of that, to be sure, but there were a lot of libertarians there too, who were very upset about the bailouts, who were very upset about the ongoing wars, and a lot of what was going on in the occupied cities was your people who would traditionally classify themselves as being left were coming together with libertarians and people on the right saying, we really have a lot of things in common. We don't like bankers committing crimes and not being prosecuted. We don't like bailouts, and we don't like wars. And that was really sort of, I think, the threat that was represented to Wall Street and to the big business and the big financiers was these people are forming a real organic movement. We need to crush this thing. And then for the first time, you saw the mayors getting together with the financiers, completely in violation of posse comitatus in organizing, police responses to the movement. But you're right. It was the attack on capitalism to me, it wasn't an attack on capitalism. The attack was on bailouts. If people were using the term capitalism, they were misusing it. Because bailouts have nothing to do with capitalism, as you well know.
Yeah, I think it's intention that they badmouth capitalism, because the more capitalism there is, the less power that the central authorities have.
Right. And I try not to get hung up on words, because different words have different meaning. Capitalism, socialism, those words are fraught with, my team is this and your team is that, and it's best to sort of focus on what is the real issue. And like I said, the real issues going on at that time. By the way, one other thing going on with Occupy, in my opinion, on the ground was, you got to remember the bottom 50% of the population got hit by the 2008 crisis much harder than everybody else. They lost something like 80 to 90% of their wealth in the space of a couple of years. And there was that element to it too, that again, nobody was really talking about.
Yeah. I only bring up capitalism because to me, it's the kind of the answer to everything that we're talking about, because it removes all the power away from these central planners. I mean, I was absolutely horrified by the clip you played in your video of the head of Bank of International Settlements. That was just like,
yeah, Augustin Carstens.
Absolutely crazy. I mean, he really to be over our shoulder with every transaction we make.
Right. They want control of, but again, some people would say, from the left point of view on capitalism would be, well, what are you talking about? It's the people with the most capital making the rules. And there's some that complaint is not a totally invalid complaint.
No, there's definitely some validity to that. There's no doubt about it. Yep.
For sure. But again, it gets to me, the easier issue that I think you could get more people on board on is the rule of law. The notion that there should be a level playing field. Why is there this group of people, this tiny group of people that can create money out of thin air and lend it to everybody else, and then pull the rug out from everybody by canceling loans after they've got their shorts in on your business?
Right.
I mean, it's just a ridiculously rigged system. I think, a rigged system, everybody would get on board with that. We don't want a rigged system, right? And the system now is rigged. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. Everybody sees that, I think.
Oh, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. So tell me, where do you see the economy going over the next 6 to 12 months? And you're talking about central bank digital currency coming to life in the next several years.
Yeah, that's going to take some time.
Okay.
And I think in the meantime, we're in for inflation.
Okay.
I think the Fed is jawboning on quantitative easing.
Okay.
This is not the first time it's jawboned on QE. It's done that before. It generally doesn't work out. You saw how it worked out in September of 2019 as they were trying to taper. Even the Fed itself is like, well, we're still going to buy $120 billion of assets a month. We're just going to ramp that down. And it's like, well, that's not really tapering. That you're still drinking a lot of Kool-Aid every month and adding fuel to the fire. You're adding it at a lesser rate than you did a year ago. But a year ago, you were breaking records left, right, and center.
Clearly from your videos, you know this is intentioned and they're trying to inflate their way out of debt, correct?
I think that's my read on it, because if you look this year, 2021, for the first time, you've got a situation where when you add together the interest on the debt plus the non-negotiable obligations of the federal government, the Social Security, the Medicare, Medicaid, the payments that you can't renege on. Politically, you can't renege. Janet Yellen's not going to get up in front of a microphone going, hey, we're going to cut your Social Security payment. That's not going to happen. When you add together the non-negotiable payments plus the interest on the debt, you now have a situation where those payments exceed tax receipts. And that's a real problem. And so I think the Fed's strategy is to try to inflate the way of the US out of that problem. And that's the inflation that you see, in my opinion, is both deliberate and it's permanent. It's not going away. And remember, there's still a lot of untapped money that's sitting idly. It just hasn't been. It's sort of like potential energy getting ready, waiting to be converted to kinetic energy on the Fed's balance sheet. If you look at the Fed's balance sheet, it's $8.6 trillion. Okay, there's something like 1.9 trillion of that is reverse repos. So it's a liability on the balance sheet, yes, but it's not money, right? It's untapped potential. So I think we've got room to go on inflation, even if the Fed stopped buying assets tomorrow, which it's not gonna do. You still got $1.9 trillion looking for a home.
Well, you did a great video on Omarova. Is that Omarova? How do you pronounce her name?
Yeah, Stala Omarova.
Omarova.
Some people said Omarova. It doesn't really matter.
Well, in that video, you discuss her thoughts on the central bank digital currency, and I think she spelled out a map where the Fed could actually become like a hedge fund and go long and short equities.
Yeah, that was her proposal. She had a law review article in Vanderbilt Law Review called The People's Ledger. And she says, the Fed did such a great job during the pandemic that it's really ready to step up its game. And here's my plan. From now on, we'll just take all the commercial bank accounts everybody's got, and we'll just move them onto the Fed's balance sheet. So instead of being liabilities to the banks, which they are right now, they're sitting at about $18 trillion. We'll just move all that onto the Fed's balance sheet on the liability side. And on the asset side, we'll let the New York Fed go out and buy stocks. They can short stocks. They can buy mortgage-backed securities. They can short whatever they want. And if there's inflation, she says, no problem at all. All we'll do is we'll take all those liabilities on the balance sheet, your bank accounts. We'll just ratchet down those. We'll just take money out of your account, and that'll cure inflation. I read that law. Lady, are you kidding me?
That's
really
why I made shocking the arrogance and the self-righteous attitude they have toward our money. I mean, it's our labor that's creating that money. It's not theirs.
Yeah, the hubris was absolutely out of control. And keep in mind, what got me about the hubris was like, hey, lady, didn't you got busted for shoplifting at TJ Maxx, didn't you?
Did you?
So oh yeah. So in that video, I link her law review article and said, hey, when you're touting the Fed here and what a great job it did, you're lying. You're overblowing what they did. You're hiding a little thing inside a big thing. Just like you did in TJ Maxx when you put your purse inside the shopping cart and you hid all your goods inside the purse and you surrounded them with the goods in the shopping cart and you went out and you checked out, pulled the purse over your shoulder and you went outside and you got busted by the security guard. 4 pairs of shoes in the shopping bag or in the purse.
That says a lot about her as a person.
Yeah, I mean, plus I went into some of the testimony she gave in the Senate where she's just simply lying.
Yeah.
She says, well, Senator, I said this and I said that because the whole point of my law review article was to help community banks and to help, small credit unions and whatever. And I was like, I just read this article. I don't remember that. So I go into the video and say, that's not the whole point of the article. She doesn't even mention these things until page 35 of the article.
Yeah.
So she's got a real problem with being forthright and being honest. And I pound her into the sand in that video.
You were once a fan of hers, correct?
Yeah, well, she's done some really remarkable work. Yeah, she's written some. I mean, before she was ever nominated to become head of the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, she had written some phenomenal pieces. Like The Merchants of Wall Street is really good. The Finance Franchise is really good. She's done some top-notch work. But then all of a sudden, this piece, The People's Ledger, comes out. And I will say, Louis, that a lot of the good work she's done, she did in conjunction with some other people. Like another law review article she did that I talk about and I have a video called Has the Fed Kept 2 Sets of Books for the Last 50 Years? She and a bunch of co-authors point out that the liabilities on the Fed's balance sheet, they really aren't liabilities. They're really equity. It's equity that belongs to we the people. And they're exactly right about that. And that was what I done a video praising that article. But then her very next article, which she wrote solo, is this People's Ledger thing, which is just financial psychopathy. It's insane, that article.
It kind of makes you wonder, did something change in her life? I mean, one thing I noticed, I was pretty as I mentioned off camera, I was pretty active in the fighting Common Core.
Yeah.
And one thing we noticed was all the groups that were coming out and positive for Common Core, you know, the PTAs, whatever they were, they all received grants from certain institutions prior to that. So, I mean, it was pretty obvious that they were getting paid off to come out in support of the Common Core. So it makes me wonder, the way my mind works, did she get paid off some sort of grant at her school or something else?
Yeah, I wondered the same thing. And in my video, Sal Omarov was the wrong kind of bank regulator, which is my last video.
Yeah.
I said, you got to wonder why she wrote this article, because it touts the Fed so hard. Like the Fed is in a position to really take over the retail money supply. And I'm just like, what? Where is this coming from? And I just left it at that. I just said, you have to wonder why she wrote this.
Yeah.
I don't know. The rest is speculation. No.
Yeah, of course. But the question remains.
Yeah, but I do know my own opinion, having read a lot of her pieces over the years. Mm-hmm. This one is just like the outlier that doesn't fit with the rest. Okay. Something's different.
She suddenly drank the Kool-Aid in some way.
Yeah, suddenly the biggest fan of the Federal Reserve you've ever seen. Which is, the element of the Fed, the branch of the Fed, which is the 12 regional Federal Reserves that's printing money. They're all privately owned. She's supposed to be on the side of, well, it's the people, and we the people should have the power to print the money like we did back in the time of the revolution and all this stuff. Yeah, I'm all on board with that. But the Fed printing the money, that's not we the people at all. Not at all. It's a sham is what it is. Why the about face? And that's from my point of view.
The ones that own those regional banks are the major banks like JP Morgan, correct?
Yeah, in theory, it is. Yeah, it would be the commercial banks in the 12 geographic districts, in theory, own the banks, the regional Federal Reserves. However, Eustace Mullins did some research and says, well, a lot of it's owned, and he could be right. The two things could be straight. There are a lot of them are owned by Europeans and European groups and banks, but there's no way to ever resolve that without seeing the paperwork, number one. And number two, even if you're right that, even if the official story is true, that the local commercial banks own the regional Federal Reserves, the question then becomes, who owns the commercial banks?
Of course.
And you'll never find that out, because when you look at the proxy statements, that are filed with the 10K, what you'll see is that the top three owners of any major bank, the top three owners really of any major corporation, are all the same. It's BlackRock, it's State Street, it's Vanguard, it's the usual suspects. And good luck finding out who owns them.
Yeah, crazy world.
Yeah. So there's disclosure out there, but it's an onion. And when you peel back the layers, you're going to find the layers look very similar, and I'm not getting anywhere.
Okay. Obfuscation everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So your formal training is as an attorney, correct?
Yeah, I keep bouncing around. I started as an engineer, and they were shipping factories off. So then I went to law school. I did patent litigation for a long time, with an emphasis on litigation. Typically two companies would litigate the rights to whatever. They battle it out in court. I represented a lot of smaller inventors against big corporations. But then, 2008 happened, and that's like, what is going on in the world? Something is not the way I think it is. And I began to, look beyond my profession to really became interested in the world around me, realizing it wasn't as presented, and there were some fundamental problems that I was literally sleeping through.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. My formal training is a lawyer.
So that begs the question to me: how do we wake up others?
Well, how do you? What you can do and how do you wake up? Those are two different things. Waking up is an individual thing.
Right.
People wake up and they're ready. All you can really do is sort of show people the evidence and don't get more invested in that. I used to lose a lot of sleep. People don't get it. They're not getting it.
No, people do not get it at all.
Not at all.
Most people are asleep.
I finally, and that's one of the reasons I do a YouTube channel. It's like, that's my outlet. I do some videos. I do some interviews with you, with other people. That's as much as I can do. And for me to not worry about what the rest of the world is doing, how to wake people up. We can just do what we're doing, Lee. That's it. There's really no more. Yeah. Now, what do you do to get out of it? I'll tell you this, because there is no rule of law anymore, in my opinion, with these banks not being prosecuted, and coupled with the fact that they're now mega banks and that they already have the sovereign right to print money out of thin air, those banks in a lot of ways are the real sovereign. We the people are not the real sovereign anymore. So in my opinion, we are now in a place in this country, we're in the same place we were in 1775, where we are under the boot heel of a very tyrannical dictator. And the only way to get out of that is you're not voting your way out of that.
No.
Okay.
No.
The colonists tried that too. They implored the Parliament time and again. They implored King George III time and again. This isn't fair. What you're doing is wrong. And they got nowhere. And eventually, they had to revolt. I think that's where we are. But I can rest assured, with no rule of law, there is no longer any legal mechanism that is going to get you out of this bind. If the criminals have taken over your home, they don't care how you're going to vote toward their, cabal over your house. They're going to laugh at you for voting. And that's kind of where we are.
I was so excited to vote when I turned 18. I ran out and I did, the first year, and I've pretty much voted every year. But past couple of years, I think it's a waste of time. I really do.
In my view, my time is better spent doing other things.
Yeah, it's sad. It's very sad because
it's
not really supposed to be.
Right. But if some people are allowed, and this is, the Justice Department itself has come out, it's on record as saying we can't prosecute banks in many instances because it would result in collateral consequences. And that collateral consequences provision is written into the U.S. Attorney's Manual, and it's still there. We learned about that in 2013. It lasted through the Trump administration and into the Biden. It's not going away. Those banks are literally above the law.
Can you unpack that a little bit? Because I'm not too familiar with this.
For a corporation, you can prosecute a corporation. Okay. That's what happened with Arthur Andersen. It was prosecuted criminally as a business entity. And the legal theory is respondeat superior. And what that means is if you have a corporation, let's just take a bank. If you have a bank that is committing crimes of such an egregious and nefarious nature, and with such a thorough nature throughout the bank, it's like you have so many officers and directors in the bank individually committing crimes. At some point, it becomes fair to prosecute the bank as a criminal enterprise. It's like, the crime in your institution is so thorough, it's so saturated with crime, your culture, that it's now fair to prosecute the bank as a criminal entity. But as a result of the Arthur Andersen prosecution, where the big accounting firm goes down and a lot of people got unemployed, the Justice Department wrote into the U.S. Attorney's Manual a section basically called Guidelines for Corporate Prosecution. I think it's in section 28-300. And they list a number of factors that prosecutors are supposed to consider when deciding whether or not to prosecute a bank. Realistically, we're talking about banks, okay? So how thorough was the crime? Did they cooperate? How many people were involved? And one of the factors, and there's 11 of them, one of the factors is collateral consequences, meaning if you take down this bank, are we going to have a lot of people unemployed, a lot of people in the breadline? Is it going to cause the stock market, is it going to cause all these problems?
So basically it comes down to too big to prosecute.
Yes, but it was used, if you think about it, to even get to that provision in the U.S. Attorney's Manual where you're deciding whether to prosecute the corporation, that you already know, just by getting to that provision, you already know that a lot of bankers in that organization committed crimes. It is legally impossible for a corporation to commit a crime without employees, high-ranking employees in that organization, to have individually committed crime themselves. As my legal history professor used to say, it's just a corporation. It's a legal fiction. The corporation, it doesn't have eyes. It doesn't have a mouth.
Right. It's the people in the corporation that actually committed.
Yes. And what we saw with the non-prosecution of the banks, particularly in early 2013 with the release of the Untouchables by PBS Frontline, was it's not only that you're not prosecuting the banks, you aren't prosecuting any bankers either. So in a lot of ways, that collateral consequences provision of the U.S. Attorney's Manual was being used as a cover story to gloss over the fact that you weren't prosecuting any individual bankers either. What's up with that? So in a lot of ways, the collateral consequences part of the U.S. Attorney's Manual is a false cover story to mask the fact that there is a policy that was instituted at the very beginning of the Obama one administration, when he was inaugurated early
Yep,
2009.
yep.
And he came in and he said right from the get-go, with respect to prosecutions, we're going to look forward, not backward, meaning we're not going
Yeah.
to punish anybody.
The
And he made good on that.
The ending of the movie The Big Short comes to mind.
Yes. Yeah. That's probably, in my view, the best movie, certainly the best mainstream movie on the financial crisis.
And unfortunately, we're here again, aren't we?
Yeah, but we're here again,
But much worse.
but the stakes are higher
Yep, yep.
and the consequences are more severe because people have failed upward and they've failed into bigger and bigger and bigger entities. We are now staring at a situation where, the Fed is wanting to take over the retail money supply. It is very clear that that is where the Federal Reserve is headed generally, and well, that's where central banks are headed generally, and the Fed.
We're all also into that. I mean, they're getting deep into that already, right? I mean, it's not like something that's ahead of us.
No, they're looking at it now. They're prototyping stuff. The Boston Fed, in particular, is very interested in central bank digital. It's going to happen. The question is what has to happen in the interim, and I think you're going to see a lot of strange things are going to happen. Weird scenes in the gold mine are on their way.
This is probably a moot question, but how does this fit in legally, constitutionally, into the rule of law, if you will?
Well, there's no rule of law. It's illogical, when you have no rule. So, just to talk about the rule of law very briefly, that's really the John Adams formulation when he in Massachusetts. He said, "Look, we want to be a nation of laws, not a nation of we want to be a nation of laws, not a nation of men." Meaning, we want the law to be supreme, not the man to be. We don't want King George III. We want King George III out. We don't want some arbitrary and capricious ruler being supreme. We want the law to be supreme. And so, in that way, he identified really the two systems of governance that you have to choose between. It's a menu of two things. Either you're a nation of laws or you're a nation of men. And I've just gotten finished telling you, the rule of law is gone. That leaves one alternative. If you don't have the rule of law, you've got the rule of man. And unfortunately, in the US, it's not only the rule of man, it's the rule of criminals, because the banks are the top dog in the US. They can commit crimes with impunity. And the Fed is on top of the banks, right? Because the Fed
that's true globally now.
Yes.
I think it's not just the United States.
Yeah, right.
And they're all connected through Bank of International Settlements and World Economic Forum and the
Yes.
World Bank, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. And if you have the rule of man throughout the globe, what that means, and these people are criminals, you're at the mercy of criminal rule.
Yeah.
And that's not a good place to be, obviously.
As I think we're seeing increasingly so.
I think it's like the crime that's being committed in the bright light of day it's so out there and so in your face that even people who have been asleep in front of the TV for decades are starting to wake up and take notice of the fact, like, what they did, and no one's going to jail. What is going on here?
Yeah.
People are starting to wake up. The question is, are enough people? Is a critical threshold of enough people going to wake up in time to stop the logical expression of criminal rule, which is enslavement?
Yeah,
right?
I agree with you. Absolutely. And even the fact that we're producing all the wealth in the country through our labor. And
yes.
They're just printing money and they're basically stealing it from us, and
right.
They're enslaving us, a little bit at a time.
And it's been going on for a long time.
Longer than you and I have been alive.
Way longer. But now what's underway is the very notion of money is being changed too. The notion that they can turn your money on and off, that's a new tool in the toolkit, and it's a dangerous one. And that's what Augustin Carson's, the head of the BIS, was talking about. Like, it's going to be great when we can just turn off your money and stop you from buying food, and then that's going to be awesome. Right?
Oh, total insanity there, Sean. It really is.
Yeah, it is totally insane. You need, so to keep doing what you're doing to wake people up to it. It's for real. I mean, let the criminals hang themselves with their quotes by guys like August and Carson's and the Fed officials and, Mark Carney. I mean, yeah, they let them talk themselves.
You say that, but I think the problem is that the language they use just obfuscates everything. He didn't even say money in that quote. I forgot
Yeah.
he said like bank liabilities or something, right?
Right. He said, well, that expression of bank liability.
Right. Which is like, that's money, like just say
Right.
it.
Yeah. Well, that's because the monetary system is so hard to understand,
It is, yeah.
because we're taught about the piggy bank model of money, and people think, oh, well, you make a loan, everybody lends like we do. They reach into their pocket and they lend out $100 and they're no longer in possession of that money. It's like, that's not how banks make loans at all.
Yeah.
Uh-uh. But
It's
the problem with trying to learn the monetary system is you have to unlearn all of the propaganda that's been pounded into your head for decades. And
yeah,
it's hard.
it took me a while to kind of get a handle on the fact that the Fed just prints money out of thin air, and I just
It prints it as debt
Yep.
too. That
Yep.
adds a
Yep, you're
very
right.
serious layer of complexity.
That is true. That is true.
So it's very hard to unlearn
Yep.
the things that we've learned, but you have to do that to understand what's going on.
Do you think there's a new Andrew Jackson on the horizon somewhere?
I think we're very misguided to wait around for the white knight in shining armor.
Yeah, no, I agree.
He's not coming.
I agree with you. I think we learned that lesson well.
This one's on us.
Yeah,
We've got to do this ourselves. Unfortunately, revolution is a young man's pursuit. And I'm old. I mean, I go to bed early.
I recently interviewed Mark Faber. One thing he said in the interview is, if I was a younger man, I'd finance revolution.
Yeah, right. If I were a richer man, I would. Yeah. Yeah.
So, is there anything that you think our viewers should know and take away from this?
Yeah, bet on inflation. You better hedge, because it's here to stay.
How would you hedge? Because I mean, precious
away.
Metals has not been a hedge in recent years. I mean, I think
no, but to me, precious metals, like, you know what, a silver quarter, always buy a gallon of gas. Get yourself some quarters.
Yeah.
An ounce gold coin will always buy a good man's suit. It's the simple things like that are going to get you through. If you're trying to chase gains and again, with no rule of law, there really are no markets, right? You're allowed to keep your winnings so long as the criminals are happy and they're content to let you do that, and only up until that point. Correct. So you're better off, to me, play it safe. Don't swing for the fences in this environment. That's a mistake. Just chip away and take care of yourself. Play defense.
Anything else you do besides buying precious metals?
No, I read a lot.
Yeah,
and I make videos.
The problem with doing that, John, is the more you learn, the more frustrated you get.
Yeah, but I make videos. That's my outlet to remain sane in all of this. It was not a good time. Let's face it.
Yeah,
we're in a rough spot right now.
Yeah, we are, and people don't even realize the full extent of it yet.
Yeah, I mean, you just can't get distracted by 95% of the population. Like, la la la, everything's great,
Oh boy, the conversations I have, I'm sure you've had it with people who just are clueless, and they think you're nuts.
Yeah, right, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I know.
I'm fine with that.
You're on the side of truth. So,
right.
Well, John, I really appreciate your time. And you have any final thoughts or words?
No, I'm glad to see you doing your channel. I hope you wish you great success doing it.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well.